This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
We are recording our player prop show a bit early for this week because I have to fly out to Florida for the WFFC this weekend. So we're talking to JJ Zachariason on a Thursday to get his read on some situations he is targeting for player props in NFL week number 14 and talking about some touchdown bets he likes over at FanDuel Sportsbook. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sanas. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here as mentioned by JJ Zachariason. Check him out on Twitter at LateRoundQB and check out LateRound.com and the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. JJ, we are into December, into week number 14. How you doing today?
I'm good. By the time a lot of people have listened to this, Baker Mayfield will have gone off for 450 yards against the Raiders secondary. Van Jefferson had 220 of them. And I'm just sitting here predicting the future.
Stupid single game entry lineup, trying to I've toyed with it like 16,000 times. Nothing feels good about this stupid game. So I just want it to be done. I want to not think about Rams Raiders ever again. So I'm kind of glad we're recording this now so I can just kind of move on with my weekend and just not think about that game for a very, very long time. But when Baker goes for 400, the people will have known. That's a good thing for sure. Now we're going to break down some player props here for week number 14, but as mentioned, we're recording Thursday. So a lot of markets aren't up yet. So focus more on, okay, when markets are posted, here are the situations I would look at first. And at that point, you have to decide, is this a low enough number or high enough number where I want to dive in? It will require a bit more thought on your end, but I think that with JJ having had a lot of success this year in pinpointing good situations to target, I think it should be still a useful discussion for us to have. We'll get into that in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Our NFL Week 14 betting show with Ryan Williams is up. That is up on the Covering the Spread podcast feed, in addition to our World Cup quarterfinal preview with Dr. Ed Feng. Both those also up on the FanDuel YouTube page. So subscribe on the FanDuel YouTube page or on the Covering the Spread podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. With only a handful of Monday Night Football games remaining this season, FanDuel and Visa are coming together to make sure the excitement surrounding Monday nights is at an all-time high. Introducing Monday Night Perfect Picks presented by Visa, a free-to-play contest on FanDuel that gives you a chance to win a share of $10,000 in cash prizes courtesy of Visa. Here's how it works. You'll be presented with 10 questions centered around on-field action for Monday night's NFL game. Fans who answer the most questions correctly win their share of the $10,000 prize pool. It is that easy. The contest is now live. So head to FanDuel.com/free/contest/Visa for perfect picks and make your picks before Monday night. That's FanDuel.com/free/contest/Visa perfect picks. No purchase necessary. Age and location restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See full terms at FanDuel.com. Visa and its financial institutions have not sponsored or offered this promotion in any way. Let's turn the book now and focus on week number 14. And JJ, you've done a lot of work on the fantasy side of things about how rookie players like receivers and running backs see their production increase as the year goes along. And there are a lot of rookies, so I think could be intriguing for player props week. So I wanted to ask you, can we translate that research in rookies getting better as the year goes along over to the player prop betting markets?
Yeah, there's going to be one that I talk about later that I think sort of fits this mold to some degree. But yeah, I mean, if you look at a book and you see a yardage line, let's say, and that line is an average of that player's or a median of that player's year-long outlook, and it's a rookie, then you probably know that that you should hit the over because typically, as long as the role has gotten at least a little bit better or even remain the same, rookie wide receivers in particular, they see big surges during the second half of the season. What I researched was more fantasy football driven, but obviously fantasy points are scored via yards and touchdowns. So if fantasy points are increasing, then yards and touchdowns are increasing as well, and usage is increasing. But it's natural to assume that it's an inherent thing that makes sense that a rookie doesn't always get off to a great start. Not all rookie wide receivers are Chris Olave, where they can just go in and get 40 yards per game right away. Some of them are like Christian Watson, where Watson was a pretty raw prospect and he was not really ready to be the number one wide receiver for Green Bay. And then something clicks, he gets more reps, he's healthy, and all of these things come together. And now all of a sudden he's just destroying. So it's definitely something to pay attention to and to recognize that if there is a line out there that's definitely being driven by what's happened throughout the season, for a rookie, that is, then you might want to hit the over because rookies do perform better towards the end of the season.
Yeah, Christian Watson is actually minus 120 to score this week despite being on bye.
Yeah, exactly.
Very impressive on his regard. Now, on a similar note, there are a couple guys specifically who I think are intriguing this week. We got James Cook and Chig Okonkwo, both guys very effective in a small sample last week, but they've had limited roles to this point. Like Okonkwo just played half the snaps, I believe, for the first time last week. James Cook played a 44% snap rate. They were very productive, but still in somewhat limited roles. Now, that could be because they were productive. That could lead to more roles or more chances this week. So how do you handle spots like that, where you're kind of trying to guess the trajectory of a role based on, they were productive, maybe they get more this week? How do you handle that kind of dynamic?
So I think first you have to just sort of read and see what beat reporters are saying first off. And if there's some signal there, then obviously you can keep going. But also just ask yourself, is this logical? Is what's going on logical? And if you look at like Okonkwo last week, he saw a big spike, but Treylon Burks got hurt early in that game. So it kind of makes some sense as to why he saw that spike. Devin Singletary, he's not really a workhorse. Like he's never been a real workhorse back. He has during stretches, but not across an entire season. And they've needed another back. If you look at what Buffalo's done over the last year, they try to get JD McKissick and he does that U-turn and goes back to Washington. They go and they draft James Cook. They go and they trade for Nyheim Hines. There's clearly this pass catching element that they want in their backfield that they don't have, or they don't think they have in Devin Singletary. And so it makes sense that James Cook is seeing more and more work. And, his receiving work has been pretty consistent now, at least over the last couple of games. I mean, he's at least a good presence in the passing game and gives them a different dynamic. I think that if you can tell yourself a story and you can answer the question, is it logical? Or if you can piece these little things together, this evidence that Buffalo wants to do this with their backfield, that they want to use a player like James Cook, then you can lean into that a little bit more. I do think that someone like Okonkwo, it's a one game thing, whereas James Cook, it's been more gradual. Yeah. When it's a one game thing, like we saw with Okonkwo, if the line is really, really low for Okonkwo, sure, and that Treylon Burks is going to be out, then yeah, you can hit the over and feel pretty good about that. But you also have to understand volatility, range of outcomes, all that kind of stuff. And, Tennessee's in a spot where, you also have to pay attention to, is Trevor Lawrence going to play? And if Trevor Lawrence doesn't play, then all of a sudden, why would they need to deploy a lot of 12 personnel and run their tight ends out there catching a lot of passes when they can just run the football more than likely and not have to really have a back and forth with Jacksonville? So there's all these pieces that you're really putting together. And then the question you have to just always go back to is it logical? If Tennessee were facing Kansas City this week and Treylon Burks were out, we would probably feel pretty good about Chig Okonkwo running a lot of routes, but they're playing, it sounds like Trevor Lawrence is going to go, but just hypothetically, if he doesn't go, then, you're in a position where this game is probably not that high scoring, not a lot of back and forth action. And so it's like, why would he be running a lot of routes? It's not very logical. So that's sort of the approach that I take with these situations. And
I think that reading beat writers kind of ties into trying to read intention on what the team is doing, because with James Cook, they got him involved early. He had a 56% snap rate in the first quarter. Yeah. He had like a 65% snap rate in the third quarter in that game. He did miss out some 2-minute work, didn't play a lot in the fourth quarter. Maybe they don't trust him to not fumble, stuff like that. But they were intentionally getting him involved. It wasn't like he just ran hot and they kept riding the hot hand. They were trying to get him worked in. And I think that kind of makes that's a signal. Yeah. It can be a signal from a beat writer, signal from what they're doing, but reading into that matters too.
Yeah, it's not like earlier in this year when they played Tennessee, they blew out Tennessee, and then James Cook sees a really good snap share, but it's because they were in a really positive game script and the game was out of hand, so they're going to get this guy some reps, where, now they're using him in the early quarters where you're seeing intent, you're seeing that they want to get him involved, and so that matters. That goes a long way.
And the construct of the game is the same too, because big AFC East game for both these games, the Patriots and the Jets. So Cook is a guy who is very much on my radar. Yeah. Let's talk about fluid situations that you're looking into for this week. JJ, where have you seen roles shifting, something like that you may want to exploit once markets are open?
Yeah, so we just talked about the Buffalo backfield. That's one that you can definitely pay attention to and look at James Cook. I think another backfield is the Jets in that exact same game. Robert Saleh said some positive things about Bam Knight maintaining his role, and he's looked really good. No doubt. He had a 55% snap share last week, but I do think that we have to keep in mind, this is sort of like the Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine dynamic in the way that when these backups, hypothetical backups step in, their competition in their backfield is not as strong necessarily.
Yeah.
So if they're competent backups like Samaje Perine, his competition now was Chris Evans, whereas Joe Mixon was competing with Samaje Perine. And so if they want to make Samaje Perine a workhorse back, then his competition's not as strong. And so he's going to have better numbers than Joe Mixon did, which is why we saw what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. So it's sort of similar to that with this. If we assume Michael Carter is the 1A in that offense, or maybe even the 1B, whatever, Michael Carter's a better piece of better player from a competition standpoint than Ty Johnson is as their backup. And so he's going to steal more looks in that backfield than a Ty Johnson would, at least early downward looks and ground game looks. Ty Johnson's a pretty good pass catcher. So that's definitely one of the backfields that is a little bit in flux, a little bit up in the air. But I also feel like the Jets in general are sort of in this fluid situation where, yes, Mike White has played well. Mike White has been fine. But at the same time, I think we have to recognize that they have faced Chicago and they faced Minnesota over the last 2 weeks. And those are two very, very beatable defenses and not very good defenses. And then last week against Minnesota, they ran a lot of plays. I mean, a lot of plays. And that is not something.
They were all in the red zone and they were all unsuccessful. It was all.
Yeah, exactly. That's not something that's easy to maintain week over week. So I'm probably a little bit lower on the Jets in general this week offensively. I think the books are showing that too. I mean, their implied total is not very high. So, I think it's logical to think that way, just given their opponents. And then the other fluid situation is the Miami backfield. What a weird thing that just happened last week. They had a 82 or something percent pass rate last week. And you saw for the first time since they got Jeff Wilson via trade, you saw Raheem Mostert play more snaps. And really from a percentage standpoint, a significant more snaps. The issue is they barely ran the ball. And so it's really hard to really buy into that split last week and say that this is the way it's going to be moving forward. But it does create a lot of volatility, whereas entering that week, we probably would have felt a lot more confident about Jeff Wilson moving forward.
Going back to the Jets one, you mentioned the Robert Saleh quote. It was pretty open to interpretation, I would say, the way he said it, where he said that Bam Knight's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
He did not say he will still get a 55% snap share.
Right.
And I think there's a pretty key difference there. So I agree. I'd look at Knight and see, okay, if they open up and are decently optimistic or assume that he maintains that role, that's a pretty easy spot to be pessimistic on it. Like James Robinson will not be active this week. I don't think there's any chance of that. So he's competing with Ty Johnson and Michael Carter still. That's still tough. And I think if we see an overreaction to an open to interpretation quote, that could be a spot to potentially bet some unders on Bam Knight, especially in a spot where, like you said, it's a very tough spot for the Jets offense.
Yeah.
Okay. Which yardage props do you think you're going to turn to first when you're looking for things as they open up this week?
Yeah. So over on DraftKings, you can get Daniel Bellinger, 19.5 yards as his over under. It's at -135. So it's not like, you're not getting like normal juice with it, but even still, I mean, I still think this is a really easy bet to go over. He ran the third most routes for the Giants in his return last week. He had an 18% target share in that game. Philadelphia is really good on the perimeter defensively. They've actually faced the 11th highest adjusted target share to tight ends this season, and they faced the second highest rate of targets going to the slot. Now, the Giants don't have alternatives. It's not like they have this really great slot receiver that they're going to throw the ball a lot to. So I think matchup wise, Daniel Bellinger could be used quite a bit in this game. He's hit this mark in 5 of 6 games since becoming more of a full-time player in the Giants offense. So I know the juice isn't perfect in this with this bet, but even still, negative game script, they could be throwing a lot. 19.5 seems very, very low for Bellinger. I think this line should be honestly closer to 30 yards. So you can hit the over there. And then I have one more for you, another receiving prop, Nick Chubb over 7.5 receiving yards. I actually think, or maybe not, but I did miss a Nick Chubb receiving yardage prop bet earlier this season on this.
And he had a 30-yard catch on the first play the next week.
Yeah, right. So I'm hoping things turn around this time. But Nick Chubb had 0 receiving yards last week. He didn't have a single receiving yard, but that's likely because the Browns were playing ahead in that game against Houston. It was a game where they didn't need to air it out or anything. But in his 3 previous games, they faced neutral or negative game scripts against the Buccaneers, the Bills, and the Dolphins. And in those games, he saw 18, 48, and 16 receiving yards when this line is 7.5. Against Cincinnati earlier this year, he did catch 1 pass for only 3 yards. But if you recall, the Browns actually crushed the Bengals earlier this season.
I do recall. I bet the Bengals. Good stuff. Before the Jamar Chase injury got announced. It was awesome. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah. So the Browns crushed the Bengals earlier this season, and that allowed for that positive game script. So, therefore, fewer dump offs to Nick Chubb. This game is now in Cincinnati. It's a pretty big spread. I think it's 5.5, 6 points, just depending on where you're getting it. I would imagine there's likely going to be a negative game script or at least a neutral script. I mean, Cincinnati's playing so well offensively right now that you have to think that things go that way. And Cleveland's really beatable in the perimeter, and Jamar Chase is back. I mean, you could see this Bengals offense doing really well in this game. So I think they're going to use Chubb more in the passing game as a result. So I'm going to hit the over on 7.5 receiving yards.
Going back to the Bellinger one, it's actually a really good example of what you were talking about, where it's a number for a rookie set based on their season-long numbers. Because if you look at his full game log for this year, his median for receiving yards, I believe, is 22 yards. So it's a little bit below that. But he played his highest snap rate of the entire year in his first game back from that eye injury.
Yeah.
So he came back and had a better role. And this prop seems like it's kind of based off of what he did before that. And it includes like week 1 where he had no targets on a 48% snap rate. He played double that many snaps or that snap rate in week number 13. So it's not just because they went to OT. The snap rate was double what it was in week 1. So I think that buying into him makes a lot of sense. And I was trying to talk myself into him for DFS this morning. Couldn't quite get there, but I think 19.5 receiving yards, so doable in that regard. Okay, we do have some touchdown numbers up over at FanDuel Sportsbook already for this week. So when you look at the touchdown markets, where are you seeing value there?
Yeah, look, the yardage props that I've been talking about of late have been great. The touchdown ones, not so great. So I'm just going to go back and go to a long shot touchdown prop. I'm going to say Isaiah McKenzie, anytime touchdown, plus 290 on FanDuel right now. This line on other books is closer to like plus 170. So you're getting good. You're getting a good number here from FanDuel. Look, it's a tough wide receiver matchup for Buffalo this week. They get the Jets, but the Jets rank top 5 in the NFL in percentage of wide receiver targets that go to the slot, which is where Isaiah McKenzie plays. McKenzie has target shares of 26% and 15% over his last 2. And he's clearly been the slot guy. There were some times earlier this season, middle of the season, where we were saying, oh, maybe Khalil Shakir is going to jump up and take that role. Well, last week, Isaiah McKenzie ran 25 routes and Khalil Shakir ran 5. So it's very clearly Isaiah McKenzie as the slot guy. I like the idea of going after Josh Allen's wide receivers. In this case, it's the best individual matchup of the week, in my opinion, for Buffalo. So Isaiah McKenzie, anytime touchdown, plus 290. Probably don't lock it in, but lock it in.
Well, with the Jets, you think about their defense, their 2 key corners, DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner, are kind of like these shutdown kind of guys, but they both stay outside they stay on their respective sides for the most part. McKenzie in that game against the Patriots ran 25 routes, 20 in the slot versus 5 out wide. So he's not going to see a lot of Sauce, not going to see a lot of Reed. That's a good situation for him to be in. So McKenzie plus 290, you're price shopping, getting a good number on that. I think it makes a lot of sense. And like we said, a big game for the Buffalo Bills. That is JJ Zachariason. Check him out on Twitter at Late Round QB. Find his work at lateround.com. You can find his podcast, the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, wherever you get your podcast. JJ, I appreciate you accommodating my flight schedule for this week. Good luck to you in week 14 as you're getting set for the fantasy football playoffs. We'll talk to you once again next week.
Thanks, Jim.
Big thank you to JJ again at Late Round QB on Twitter. I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. That's all we got for this week. Our week 14 preview is up. We also have the World Cup quarterfinal preview posted. Get all those by subscribing to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Have a fantastic week 14. Enjoy the quarterfinals. We'll talk to you once again Monday to preview the Patriots and the Cardinals. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.